Last year, I did a few technical episodes like how battery works, how motor works, how battery degrades, etc. etc. And as part of that series, I was supposed to cover also an episode on cell balancing of EV batteries. But I thought I'll hold it back because those episodes are a bit more technical and not many people were watching it. So I held it back, and today I'm going to cover that episode on cell balancing of EV batteries. Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting episode of Green and Clean YouTube channel. My name is Vittal. I've put the links to those videos. If you haven't watched those videos, maybe it will help. Even otherwise, it should be fine to simply jump into this episode and watch this fully till the end. Once again, I want to remind that this channel is more about facts and figures and other technical details about EVs. I don't cover like car models and this car is better, that car is better, the review of cars, the breaking news in the EV space, etc., etc., etc. I don't cover any of that. So this channel is slightly different from the other EV channels that you might be watching. And if you like such content, kind request to like, subscribe, and share these episodes. Okay, let's get started. You probably know by now that a battery doesn't mean one cell. It is a bunch of cells, which is called as battery. Actually, people call it battery pack, and for that very reason, it contains a lot of batteries or battery cells. That's why it's called as a battery pack. And as you know, there are two ways batteries are built. The first one is called as cell to pack, which means all the cells, thousands of cells, go into a battery pack directly, and the second way is cell to module. A bunch of cell go into a battery module, and then those modules go into battery pack. So cell to pack and cell to module to pack. So these are the two types of battery packs. So each battery pack contains thousands of cells, and each cell has a safe operating voltage, which is between roughly about 2.5 volt to 4.2 volts. Depending on LFP or NMC, the high level of voltage may differ. LFP usually have a cap of 3.5 to 3.6 voltage, whereas NMC has a much higher 4.2 volts of capacity. Once again, these are safe operating voltages of each cell, so it doesn't mean that the cell won't work below that voltage or above that voltage, but if you operate below or above those voltages, then there will be dire consequences to the battery, including battery fire, thermal runaway, or considerable degradation of the battery. So that's why battery designers have allocated a safe voltage limits with a lower range of 2.5 volt and a higher range of 4.2 or 3.6 volts per each cell. Just like how you measure a fuel tank's capacity in terms of number of liters of petrol or diesel it can hold, the battery pack is measured in terms of state of charge or SOC. And SOC is a tricky thing. It is told that nobody knows what is the complete capacity of the battery. So SOC is just an estimation of capacity or the estimation of the range that your car can run. It can never be accurate. Nobody knows what is the exact capacity or the exact range that you can get out of a battery pack. It is always an estimation. So SOC is always an estimation by the BMS. In order to measure the SOC of a battery pack, you need to measure the SOC of each individual cells and then calculate what could be the SOC of the entire battery pack. And that's what BMS tries to do. There are a few methods in which the SOC is calculated. The first method is the Coulomb counting method. Here, roughly the current flowing through various cells are measured, and based on that, an SOC is estimated by the BMS. And the second method is the voltage method. Here, instead of current, it is the voltage that is measured by the BMS for each of the cells and then arrived at a cumulative SOC. Then there is a third method, which is called Kalman filter method, which is somewhat of a combination of voltage, current, the temperature, and the battery chemistry. So it's slightly a combination of all of this, and at the end of the day, SOC is estimated by BMS using one of these three methods. So obviously, when you have thousands of cells, it is quite possible and normal that SOC of each individual cells in a battery pack may vary from one another. Ideally, it should be the same. If it is 80%, then all cells should be 80% SOC, but it would vary in real life. It could be anywhere between, let's say, 76% to 82% or something like that. As the SOC of each individual cells vary over a period of time, that's when a balancing is required between these cells. A balancing is an act where the BMS tries to make sure that all the cells are eventually more or less at the same SOC rather than having a high high variation between the top cell and the bottom cell. And an important thing to note is that your battery pack is only as good as the weakest cell. So if you have a weak cell, then your battery pack is going to suffer. It's the same thing as a chain, let's say a gold chain or a silver chain, which is made up of several links. And if one of the link is weak, then the chain is going to break, right? So something similar happens in the battery pack. Since the cells are connected in series or parallel, eventually a bad cell or a weak cell would impact the whole battery pack, and that's why it's important to fix those weak cells as and when there is a chance to fix them. So based on when BMS tries to do the cell balancing, we call it as top cell balancing or bottom cell balancing. In the case of top cell balancing, the BMS tries to do cell balancing as the SOC reaches close to 100%, and in the case of bottom cell balancing, the cell balancing is done when the SOC reaches close to 0%. So the top and bottom cell balancing is a measure of when the cell balancing is done. There is another terminology which talks about how cell balancing is done. That is called as active cell balancing and passive cell balancing. In the case of active cell balancing, a higher SOC cell is made to give its power to other cells so that those cells can get some power and their SOCs more or less reach the same level. So that is active cell balancing, where power is distributed from one cell to another cell. In the case of passive cell balancing, the power is simply wasted or converted into heat using resistors, so that the cell that is at high SOC doesn't continue adding power to it. So in the case of passive cell balancing, it just goes as a heat and it just generates a lot of heat. So normally, the moment one cell reaches 100%, the BMS decides to stop charging because it's quite dangerous to overcharge even a single cell. So whichever cell reaches 100% first, the SOC is declared as 100% and the charging stops. And similarly, in the case of discharge, whichever cell reaches 0%, BMS decides that battery is at 0%. So there's probably harm to do deep discharge of a cell that has already reached 0%. Most EVs do cell balancing at top level, meaning they do top balancing or top cell balancing. And the reason for that is we are more likely to charge car to 100% rather than discharge the car all the way to 0%. In fact, we should never discharge the car to 0%, but sometimes it happens. I've seen some people doing it. I have never crossed below or I've never gone below 5% SOC. So we should never discharge the batteries deep. So because it is unlikely that people will take their SOCs to 0%, the car manufacturers do cell balancing at top because that's more likely going to happen. And also, if you do bottom cell balancing, ultimately what it would mean is that you drive the car till it stops, till it becomes 0, and then you have to tow the car just because you have to do the cell balancing. You don't want to do bottom cell balancing, reach 0%, and then tow the car and then charge, right? So that's another reason why for cars it is top cell balancing. In other equipments, let's say a battery for storage, etc., there are cases where bottom cell balancing is done or preferred. So in the case of top cell balancing, what happens is that when one of the cell reaches, let's say, about 95%, and BMS sees that there are cells which are still below 90%. This is just an example, okay, just to explain the concept. So if a top cell is at 95% and there are several cells which are below 90%, then the BMS tries to waste energy or waste power that goes into this cell which is at 95%, so that it doesn't charge more and reach 100%, and then the charging will stop, right? So that's why the cell which is at 95% is made to waste power until other cells have reached somewhere close to 95%, right? So that's how the top cell balancing is done, and that's why the charging speed stops a little bit when you go, let's say, above 90% or 95%. It goes very, very slow because it has to the BMS has to balance the cells. So once all the cell reach more or less 95%, then the charging will continue, and hopefully when it reaches 100%, all cells are more or less 100%. Remember, 100% SOC means that at least one cell is at 100%, and it need not mean that all cells are 100%. So if a top cell balancing is not done, if you don't do, let's say, slow AC charging, then there is a chance that even though the SOC is reached 100%, you're charged to 100%, there could be cells which are still below 100%. So you will have some range loss, etc., because only one cell is at 100% and rest most of the cells are at 95%. Then you are probably going to get only 95% of the range. And for bottom cell balancing, it's very similar. So the moment one cell reaches, let's say, 5%, then the BMS will stop withdrawing power from that particular cell and tries to take from the other cells, so that the other cells also try to reach somewhere close to 5%, and then everything is normal. So this is how the top and bottom cell balancing is done. I'm sharing some infographics that I could get it through AI, so I'm sharing it here so you can see whatever I explained a little bit in a pictorial form here. So that's top and bottom cell balancing. I would like to just give a disclaimer that I'm not a battery expert, I'm not an electrical engineer, just sharing what I learned as part of owning an EV, and that's what I presented today. Always what I hear is it's a good practice. If you have a LFP battery, try to charge 100% as much as possible using slow AC charging. That will ensure that your cell balancing happens more regularly, therefore less chances of cell imbalance in your battery pack, therefore better range and better health of the battery. Whereas in the case of NMC, you should probably stop at 80% and then do once in a while 100% charging. So LFP in my car in BYD E6, what is suggested is connect and charge to 100% as much as possible, preferably with AC slow charging, and once in 2 or 3 months, take the car down to 5% or below and then charge to 100%. So that's the best practice that is mentioned in the user's manual of this car. So please check what is the recommended practice from your manufacturer and follow that method. Thanks a lot for watching another episode of GreenNClean YouTube channel. See you again in other episodes.